we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Calico Clark, and I am a teacher consultant with POPEY. I am also the literacy coordinator for the Cathet District 47. And I'm joined with two of my fabulous colleagues from POPEY, Lisa, who's going to help to monitor the chat, and Chelsea, who is going to be sure to share some of the resource links as we go through our session. So if you want to connect with us, we've got a couple of options, formerly known as Twitter. You can find us at X or at Instagram. And Chelsea does an amazing job of sharing some of the work that we're doing and upcoming events. So be sure to follow along on those social media platforms if you choose to. You can also find us at our website, popey.ca. So we'll go ahead and jump in. Today, I just want to acknowledge that I am joining you from the beautiful traditional territory of the Cohaman Nation and the Ayajutham speaking people in the region known as Cathet. And I'll just give you a quick overview of our quick hour. Hopefully I can keep you engaged and probably leaving the hour wanting to learn a little bit more is how I would love for this to go. So we'll look at some of the research around vocabulary and how it connects to reading. We'll look at some strategies for the classroom and resources that can support you in your instruction. We'll look a little bit at some foundation pieces to start off with in some models of reading, and then we'll kind of digest what it looks like to know a word, ways we can teach words, and some ideas in the classroom. So it'll be a quick hour, but I'll be sure to, I hope, leave you with some things that you can take away right away. So I just wanted to highlight some of the resources that inspired my learning around vocabulary instruction and that I've included in this presentation. You may be familiar with the first Shifting the Balance book that Perkins and Yates released. And then their first chapter, they talk about oral language and comprehension and how important that is to the foundations of reading. And a book that you'll see a lot of reference to is from the Classroom Essentials series called Vocabulary Instruction Across the Day. If you're familiar with that series, it's phenomenal. It's easily digestible, professional reading. The books are beautiful, the layout, lots of colors and images, and they have some amazing videos that support the content from the book. And we'll see some clips from those videos together today. I also wanted to highlight that our very own Jen Kelly has written and published a book titled Active Reading Classrooms. And in that, she's got an amazing section on vocabulary instruction and some ready to go, really easy to implement tips and tricks for your classroom. So I'm going to jump right into sharing a video with you to just sort of set the stage on making the connection to reading and the reading brain. And the video is Marianne Wolf. You might be familiar with some of her books. She's written Reader Come Home, Reading in the Digital Age, and also The Probst and the Squid, in which she talks a lot about the reading brain and how that process of reading occurs for learners. So she talks a little bit about language, how it's connected to reading and this reading circuit. So I'll go ahead and play this clip and we can just listen to her words of wisdom to set the stage. I could listen to her speak about reading and the brain forever. She's so articulate. So just bringing that in to the context of that oral language piece, especially when we're looking in the context of primary classrooms. And I'll just jump into, this is the part, bear with me, that can be a little bit dry, but it actually is really important to set the stage for the why vocabulary instruction is so important in our literacy classrooms. So this may look familiar to you, and it may not. It's called The Simple View of Reading, and the image is actually from the UFly Foundation's manual. You might recognize that coloring. And The Simple View of Reading is a model of reading that comes from research from 1980 and 81 by Tuffman and Go. And an interesting piece of information about this research is that it has been replicated hundreds of times. And other people that have tried to replicate this study have only been able to prove it. No one has actually ever been able to disprove this model of reading. So we'll unpack it a little bit together. In that it's like a multiplication sentence. So the ultimate product is reading, making meaning, and reading comprehension, which is of course the goal for reading in whatever context we're looking. And so the outcome is reading comprehension, but together decoding, the ability for word attack, coupled with linguistic or language comprehension. Those two pieces together work together to create reading and making meaning and a proficient reader. Interesting to note, just like a mathematical or a multiplication sentence, we need 1 times 1 to give us 1. So we really need to be skilled in word attack and decoding. And we need to have a large background knowledge, vocabulary, oral language. Those two things working together result in a proficient reader. If one of those pieces, though, is missing or is weak, of course, in a multiplication sentence, the ultimate goal of reading to make meaning is also weakened. So an example being, you can have the strongest decoder, right? You have a student who has word attack confidence, but they don't have a lot of background knowledge, world experience, life experience, or vocabulary. They're spending a lot of time as they're reading in connected text, trying to sort out meanings, and that's taking a lot of cognitive load that's taking away from the ultimate goal of understanding our text. Likewise, we all have had these students who know everything to know about dinosaurs or ancient Egypt or whatever the topic is, those kids that just have so much background knowledge and content knowledge. But if they really struggle to decode and read words, again, that cognitive load, the meaning is getting lost because they're spending all their time and capacity in just trying to sort out what the letters and sounds mean in a word. So it's really important to have all of those pieces to come up with proficient reading. So in 2001, a researcher by the name of Hollis Scarborough came to expand, I guess, if you will, the simple view of reading and her analogy of a rope. And so looking at, we still have language comprehension, we still have word recognition, but you can see those are articulated, and vocabulary is clearly articulated as one of the pieces of language comprehension. And in this analogy, those pieces of the strands of the rope are woven together to result in skilled reading. So we're still looking at those two important factors to result in making meaning. Bear with me, one more model. And this one is the most recent. It's called the active view of reading from Duke and Cartwright's research. And you'll see similarities. The ultimate goal is making meaning and being a proficient reader. And we're still looking at word recognition and language comprehension. You'll notice that 2 new pieces are added to this model, though, and they're really important. There's bridging processes. You can see vocabulary as part of that. And then this notion of active self-regulation. Motivation, engagement, executive functioning skills, strategy use. And I think that's a really important piece that's been added to this model to think of a complete picture of a reader. So one of the things that Jen does beautifully in her book is breaks down the active view of reading into digestible, really manageable sections and chapters to make sense of that model and what it looks like in a classroom. And she highlights some of the differences in what's added into that model, and those being the bridging processes, that they strengthen both word recognition and language, and vocabulary is one of those. And of course, that active self-regulation, and that we know students aren't passive participants in reading, that they are active, engaged participants in making meaning. And I think in our context now in our schools and in what the work that we're doing, this model also highlights the importance of cultural knowledge as part of a way that we understand the language around us. So Jen does a really great job of that in her book. And I just think it's important to highlight those pieces as we move forward and tucking those models of reading into the back of your mind, and then building the connection to why vocabulary instruction is important to talk about. So just a couple of things to reiterate. They're probably things that you're already nodding and going, yeah, but I think it's just important to note that a rich vocabulary supports learning about the world, new ideas, and just enjoying the beauty of our language. It enhances what an individual wants to say and write. And then this piece, I think, is really important to connect back to reading, that there is a lot of research that supports the vocabulary knowledge is strongly related to reading proficiency and comprehension, and it goes across primary, intermediate, high school, and adults. So that research, those results showed the importance of and the connection from vocabulary to comprehension in young children, intermediate, middle school, high school, and adults. So those are some of the big ideas around why teaching vocabulary is important. So it enhances all the kids that are in front of us in our classroom, their ability to read, write, speak, listen, and learn. And keep this in mind. I love this image when I'm thinking about vocabulary. Is it like a door to comprehension? It's a door to making meaning. And the more vocabulary and oral language coupled with content knowledge, think of it like a Velcro ball. The more students know, the more it attaches and that ball becomes bigger to help make sense and make meaning from the text that they're engaging with. So we'll move into just a little bit of the work from Berkins and Yates from Shifting the Balance in that first chapter, if you're familiar with this book. Because we come back to making meaning and comprehension being the outcome that we want from interactions with texts. They talk about the idea that comprehension actually begins with oral language and the capacity to understand spoken language. They refer to it as listening comprehension. And so with our youngest students in kindergarten and early grade 1, while they may not be readers in text yet, this work and development is really, really essential and critical to start even before they're into reading texts. And we can do this work through conversation, through hearing and sharing our personal stories, and through interactions with texts. And all of those experiences expose children to ideas and new ways of thinking, to vocabulary, and to new content knowledge or concepts. So that when children are ready and able, they can access these new idea, vocabulary, and concepts for themselves by reading increasingly complex texts. So starting at that oral language piece is critical. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that can look like in kindergarten and grade 1, early grade 1 classrooms before students are engaging into more complex text. This quote jumps out at me from the Teaching Vocabulary Across the Day, and I think it's important, so important that I gave it a whole slide. And I think so much of us are talking about phonemic awareness and phonics and how we're approaching that and weaving that into our classroom practices, which is really critical if you think back to that model. But that even if we spend a lot of instructional time teaching decoding and strategic reading, students will continue to struggle to comprehend text unless we also support their vocabulary instruction. So if you think back to that equation, that language piece is so critical and because that mathematical equation for making meaning can't happen without that language understanding. And also Berkins, Yates, and Cunningham in the Shifting the Balance that's for 3 to 5. It's their new book, recognizing that we may have some grade 3 teachers out here in Zoom land today. But keeping in mind that the goal of vocabulary instruction in no way is to learn words for their own sake. The goal is to apply knowledge about words and their meanings to better understand what they're reading and to expand possibilities for expressing their ideas in writing. So coming back to that making sense of text and their interactions with text, and also having voice and choice and agency in what they're how they're expressing their thoughts and ideas. So back to that reading, writing, speaking, listening, and learning piece. So I'm going to ask you to jump onto the chat here for a minute. And for yourself, or thinking of the students that you work with every day, what does it really mean when you know a word? What are you able to do when you know a word? So thinking as the kids in front of you or yourself, I'm just going to invite, there are no wrong answers here. I'm just going to ask you to type into the chat box, what might you be able to do if you really know the meaning of a word or understand a word? And use it in a sentence. Great, thank you. Explain it to someone else. Multiple contexts or a joke. Absolutely, use it in many ways. Fabulous. I'm going to reveal some of these. So I put them in I can statements. I can share an informal explanation. So somebody's already said that in the chat. I can use a synonym or an antonym. Try saying synonym a whole bunch of times. So words that mean the same, or I invite kids to say what the opposite might be. Categorical information. So for example, you might be able to say papaya and kiwi are both fruit. So being able to contextualize it or categorize it. Nuances between similar words. So an example being happy and exuberant. They both mean feeling good about something, but can you explain or identify or talk about the slight nuances between those two words? Do they really mean the same? How is happy different than exuberant, for example? So the nuances. And do we recognize parts of words? Do we understand the morphological understanding or the pieces, the meaningful parts in words? And can you connect it to personal experience or context? Multiple meanings of a word. Of the dog, do we know that dogs bark and that there's bark on a tree? So do you know them in two contexts? Another one that I didn't include is, do you know the formal versus the informal use of a word? So cow. The cow is eating grass in the field versus don't have a cow. So they're the same word, but do you understand how they can be used in different contexts? So thank you for engaging in the chat. You're already well on your way to knowing the ways that we can show that we know words. So let's talk a little bit then. We're going to spend the next few slides on some ideas that are from the resources that I shared earlier about ways that we can learn new words. So what are some strategies that we can use to look? And the first one, that when we engage in conversation. And critical in the early years classrooms in that talking piece. And here's an invitation, maybe a challenge, maybe you already intentionally do this, but I'm going to encourage you or invite you to consider regularly and intentionally using sophisticated language, even in kindergarten, all day throughout the day with your students. So rather than using a super child-friendly or kid language, have a go at using the contextual language or the content language or the grown-up language if you want for your children, even if it means taking the time to pause and give a really quick definition of what that word means. We know that the more interesting words that we use around students, the more words they will pick up and use themselves. And so don't hold back when you're engaging in conversation with children. Use those sophisticated words with them, explain what they mean, and invite them to have a go with them themselves. So that's one way, is engaging through conversation. Another way that we learn new words is, of course, when we are read to and when we read a lot ourselves. So in the context of a primary classroom, perhaps we're not doing wide reading yet, but we certainly, if you could all join me, if we were all in person, I would see smiles on everyone's face about read alouds. And I don't know any classroom, really, classroom teacher that does not love our beautiful picture books and read aloud time. And this is so, so, so important for so many reasons. One of the things I'm going to do right now is contextualize read alouds in the context of vocabulary instruction. So keep reading books just for the pleasure, for the joy, for the stories that they tell, for the connections that you can make to the kids in your class. I'm also going to invite you to consider a read aloud as a tool for teaching vocabulary. And there's a little bit of different preparation and planning that would go into this kind of a read aloud. And one of the things that you'll really want to be sort of intentional about is the books that you choose, whether they have really rich language just in and of themselves, or whether they connect to some content area that you're learning, a social studies or science unit, or some kind of theme or way of being that's happening around your school. If you have school messages like kindness or whatever those concepts may be, find some of those books that really connect. And then looking and making some plans for how you're going to use them for vocabulary instruction. One of the things that I would just mention really quickly about, sorry, I just want to put this. So about independent reading, as you send your kiddos off into reading in their book bags, maybe it's with a partner or on their own. If they're reading some shared text or some common texts, whether it be through a content study, maybe they're all taking a look at those Nat Geo books about ponds and frogs, pre-teaching some words to support them in their independent reading is really important. But we don't have to pre-teach words during a read aloud. So as in pulling the words out and kind of making a huge list of words before we start our read aloud. And the reason for this is because you're right there alongside your children as you're doing the read aloud to scoop them and to hold them into unpacking those word meanings. So pre-teaching some vocabulary into it for a text that your students may be reading independently or in partner work, but you don't need to necessarily do that through a read aloud. So this is a quick video that just talks about the planning and thinking around preparing yourself and your students for a read aloud. So I'll just play. This is, I believe it's a kindergarten classroom. I love how she talks about tuck it in. That's just such a nice way to say that. One thing that I forgot to mention before showing this video, and it's probably common sense to a lot of you, in that you would probably revisit this one read aloud across multiple days. So it's not all in one go that we're trying to accomplish all of this work, because there's probably in that book, you can see just in that clip, there's lots to unpack with children. And when we go to the next section about what do we do with the words, and doing something with the words that we're teaching is really, really critical. So you can see how one read aloud might be spread out across multiple days to revisit. Maybe we go back to one page, one section, one set of words that we've been working on. So a really important context for learning words is something that Wright refers to in her book, Reading a Development Across the Day, is the idea of active processing. So I will just throw it out there that gone are the days of looking up a word and writing a definition. And probably in a primary context, we don't see that so much, but intermediate grades, that has been shown through research to be an ineffective way to learn words anyways. So what we do know, though, is that the more children interact and engage with definitions and language and meaning in different ways, that's that piece of Velcro that's going to help those words stick and the understandings of those words. So active processing, we know that children are more likely to learn when they can actively engage with a word and its meaning rather than passively receiving it from a teacher. And here's a list of some fairly common sense things. I just think it's important to bring that to mind, that we can do something. We can look at images or objects. We can understand words, and you'll see a video clip in a minute using movement to help understand a word, thinking of real life examples or multiple meanings in a word, looking at unpacking the meaningful parts. So what tricycle, triangle, and tripod, what's the same about all of those? What's that? What do you think that expanding that meaning? And of course, applying new vocabulary into the context of writing. So I'm going to share another video clip from that same classroom and that same read aloud. And the teacher does a really great job of engaging the kids in using movement actually to process their understanding of that word migration. So some nice examples there of being engaged and active in word learning, followed by that instructional piece in the read aloud. So another way that we learn new words is when we try new things. So I'm going to ask you to pop into the chat box, have a think for a minute, back to a time when you learned something new. Maybe it was knitting, paddleboarding, mountain biking, Thai cooking, whatever it was, whatever the context was, and have a think about some of the key words that you had to learn or know the meanings of to engage in that learning experience. So have a go and just type into the chat box, thinking back to a time when you learned something new. And the vocabulary, you can pop the words into the chat box. I'm going to have a go. When I was learning about mountain biking, I had to know what crank meant. Learning to chainsaw. Oh my gosh. Preloading suspension in mountain biking. Outside edge of figure skating. Yes, and horseback riding the tack. Roller skating, shoot the duck. I love it, Lisa. That's impressive. In your PDP course, pedagogy. Wow. Okay, so you see what I mean, that there's vocabulary as we learn new things. And so we can think the same for our students. And one of the things to think about right now, please know that I recognize that teachers have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and I'm simply not saying to do one more thing. I think that we can think really strategically about how we incorporate vocabulary instruction into our day. And one of those is through the content areas. So I've heard in conversations in classrooms and in meetings, oh, we're so focused on literacy instruction that we don't have a lot of time for social studies and science anymore. And I'm inviting you to shift that thinking and take that content area and bring that back into your practice. And a beautiful way to do some work around vocabulary is in our content learning. So thinking to your social studies and your science curriculum areas, deciding on a unit and gathering, if you've got a really rich school library or a public library, and creating text sets. Those are sets that are linked around a topic or a concept. So I'm thinking of a text set that I just shared with a group of teachers around. There was the Nat Geo, you know, those books about frogs and ponds and tadpoles and habitats. So that would be a conceptual or a topic-based text set. So gathering some of those for your instruction. Invite you to make an ambitious list of vocabulary that you can think of that's related to that content study. Think big and then take it down, but really think broadly of all the words that are going to help your students to read, write, think, learn, listen, and speak throughout that content area. Consider how and when you're going to teach those words. So you're going to do this through read aloud. Is it going to be through some sort of a field trip or an experience outside of the classroom, an experiment, some sort of hands-on engagement? And then what are you going to do to ensure that those kids are actively engaged in that word learning? And this is an image from the book that I've been referring to, and it just does a nice job of kind of talking about those steps. So what's your content? What's your big learning? What are your vocabulary words and your child-friendly definitions prepared ahead of time? How are you going to introduce that vocabulary? And then what are the opportunities for kids to engage in that vocabulary in meaningful ways? So it requires a bit of planning, but it is a way to bring back social studies and science into the context of literacy learning. So, short of repeating myself, learning new words is through repeated exposure and meaningful contexts. And we learn words that are relevant, meaningful, and useful. And when we have opportunities to actively engage in the processing of those words and their meanings. So we've reviewed some of the ways that we can teach new vocabulary. I'm going to share a few ideas for practical classroom applications and some resources that you could tap into when you leave this session, if you're left wanting or wondering, wanting more or wondering, still having some questions. So hopefully I'll leave you with some tools that can help you to jump into your classroom practice. So the beloved word collector, if you want to, in your Zoom toolbar, you could give a thumbs up or a smile or a clap if you know this beloved read aloud. And if you don't, then here's a fabulous takeaway. Go and find this book. It's a beautiful story about Jerome and how he experiences words and collects words. I see some hearts in the chat. Yeah, it's a lovely book. So if you don't know this book, grab it because it's a really great tool to inspire word curiosity. If you do know this book, I'd invite you to reread it with your students through the lens of becoming word scientists, word noticers, because I can tell you the more enthusiastic you are about language and words, the more enthusiastic your children will be. So when you're noticing and naming those really sophisticated grown-up words in your kindergarten classroom, I can almost guarantee that your students are going to start to notice and name those same words as well. And they're building that vocabulary Velcro and that background knowledge through all of those experiences. So this is a really great read aloud to inspire word curiosity and word noticers. I call kids, when I've done this work in classrooms, we're going to be word scientists, and we're really going to pay attention and look for evidence of words. So there's a resource for you to take back and add to your bookshelf, or go and find it off your shelf if you haven't pulled it out again, and give it a new vision, if you will. This is another resource that I just think is underknown, perhaps, and I just could scream it from the rooftops. It's from a website called WordTorque, and the part is called Engage with the Page. There's a Facebook group. If you're part of Facebook, you can also join that page, that group. So to inspire word study, and when we study words, we can learn about them and we build our vocabulary. And what this page, Engage with the Page, is a curation, a beautiful curation of picture books. There's so many of them. And each picture book has a set or a guide of ways that you can interact with the text to support some instruction in word study. It then has a small activity that you can, a reproducible, if you will, or some sort of an engagement. And the beautiful thing about this website is all of the books that have been curated are available as a YouTube read aloud. So if you don't have the book in your personal collection or in your school or public library, you can still access the text and share it. I love having the hard copy of the book, but there are some in here that are so amazing that I would actually show the YouTube video to my class, and you can pause and do some of the dive. So this is a wonderful resource and curation of books to inspire word study, or looking at, so some of the examples, they look at the suffix ing and what does that do and where do we find that in words. Or Snow Day, the beloved classic Snow Day, looks at word families all with the base of snow in them. So it's just a way to engage words through a read aloud. And many of them, there's actually a short video of Fiona Hamilton, who is the, I guess, creator of WordTorque, and her colleagues discuss the book and how they would interact with it and the different uses. So it's a really great resource that's quick and easy to use. So in order to create opportunities for young children to learn new words, we need to build their knowledge of the world and make sure that they're learning new things. So this is that tie back into content studies, social studies, and science. Don't let it go, bring it back in, if only for teaching them background knowledge and vocabulary. And one of the difficulties I know that the teachers that I work with, the experience is a lack of texts that are at a readable level. So a lot of the really great Nat Geo or I Spy books might not be at a reading level for the kids in our class. So I would direct you to a resource. It's called ReadWorks. If you're not familiar with it, it's a wonderful database of texts and text sets. And one of the resources that they offer is called Article a Day. And they're all free. So the only thing that will cost you is your photocopy budget, because you have to print out the text. But Article a Day offers a curated set from kindergarten all the way to grade 8. So it spans reading levels. And they have curated texts of a collection of about 4 or 5 articles on an individual topic. And so wide reading for background knowledge and vocabulary is sort of at the tip of your photocopy card, if you will. And the beautiful thing about the texts for K1 and 2 is that many of them are decodable, or at least 80% decodable. So you can find that on ReadWorks. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention as a resource, because I know we don't all have huge budgets for classroom libraries to get those books into kids' hands. So we want kids to also be able to find meaning and be word solvers independently. And so there's some things that we can do to offer them strategies to be powerful and strategic word solvers. 2 of them can be teaching kids how to use context clues to make meaning and looking at word parts. One thing that I've heard Jennifer Sarah-DeBello talk about is that it's not about having a whole bunch of strategies, but rather teaching kids how to be strategic as readers. I'm going to share a brief clip. Again, this is from a grade 2 classroom, and it's a teacher talking about how to use word parts to understand and make meaning from words that they may not know. So a little glimpse into a grade 2 vocabulary lesson. I don't think it's too early to start a morphology in primary grades, to unpack the meaningful parts of words, to help students as they engage into connected text to sort out meanings of words. And just the study of that prefix "un" was an example of how that can help students in any words that they come to that have that prefix, to understand that it must mean not about something. So I'm going to really quickly go through this. Sorry, I'm just noticing in the chat there okay. One of the things, a tool is called a word matrix, and you can see that gray box. And in the middle of that word matrix is the base word pack. And we can look at the prefixes and we can look at the suffixes to create more words from that. And it helps you to unpack those words. So I'm going to invite you in the chat box to just use that word matrix that you can see on the screen. And the base word is pack. Can you add a prefix or a suffix, or maybe both, to create some new words? So type those words into the chat box. I'll get you started, and I'm going to use a prefix and a suffix: backpacking. And see, yes, repackage. Perfect. Anybody else have some thoughts about using that matrix? Unpacking, right. So this is a tool that you can use with kids to help them learn the meaning of the morphemes, the prefixes and suffixes, and how those words or those parts can be attached and change meaning. Okay, thank you for jumping into that chat box. So Can Do Kids Academy is where these materials are from. They have a lot of free resources that are downloadable to support word study in your classroom. One other idea I'll quickly go through is shades of meaning. And this is a really engaging experience that you can try multiple times in your classroom. And when you're wanting to talk about triple scoop words that Adrian Gear referenced, but you want to try something different or try another approach to building kids' vocabulary, especially in their written output, you can talk about synonyms and how they are slightly nuanced in difference. So when I use that word happy and exuberant, can we think along that paint chip from happy to exuberant? Are there some words in between that mean the same? Some synonyms that might go from that light meaning to the dark meaning, or from the weak kind of shade to the stronger shade. And so this is an exercise. You can do a quick Google search. There's lots of resources out there to support using shades of meaning to help students sort of create word banks, word lists. I've seen people make keychains out of those paint chips. Just maybe wear a different hat every time you go into your local hardware store if you're going to borrow the paint chips for your classroom. This was a connection to an outdoor classroom that I supported when we did that Shades of Meaning exercise, and we started outside in the forest and just invited students to find loose parts that were available to them to discuss the nuances and of how things are slightly different in shade. So another final routine that I'll leave you with is a word collection notebook. And again, this just highlights that curiosity and awareness and interest in new words and developing that word awareness. So if you're in younger K1, maybe you're going to create a class chart or a class book as word collectors. Or perhaps if you're grade 2, 3, maybe students are going to do that work independently or slightly scaffolded from a whole class list to their own word lists. But they're noticing and naming new vocabulary that they're experiencing in the texts or in the learning that they're doing in the classroom. So I'm going to leave you with a text and a task to jump into the chat box. So at the end, when we're talking about Jerome as a word collector, the more words he knew, the more clearly he could share with the world what he was thinking, feeling, and dreaming. So there is so much to focus on in our teaching, and vocabulary instruction requires planning, as does anything that's sort of worth doing, and you can't do it all. So we could start with one thing. So my invitation to you and to the chat box before we leave, because we know in professional learning, if we don't kind of attach something to one thing that we can take away, we kind of carry on with our busy day tomorrow, and it kind of drifts away. So what's one thing that you can plan to jump into tomorrow or in the rest of the week? Can you I'll read aloud? I decide on a content. So what's one thing that you might take away and try to incorporate into your practice tomorrow or in the days following this week? So I just invite you to leave us with that reflection into the chat box. Yeah, the article a day, it's a fabulous resource. And it just takes a bit to explore. Reimagining a word matrix, yeah. Interactive read aloud. The article a day decodables, great. Dinosaur footprints, focusing on, oh great. Words that mean big, I love that. A word collection notebook. These are all amazing. Oh, I wish I could just come and visit all of your classrooms. Thank you for sharing that with us. And we'd love to hear from you. If you have something that is wild and wonderful that happens in your classroom, take a picture of it, send us an email. yeah, we'd love to hear back from you about your learning and your takeaways from our sessions. So I think Lisa's going to share a bit of a poll so we can learn from you what worked, what you would like to see different. We just love to gather feedback so that we can make these sessions even better for you. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute before you leave us to share your feedback in the poll that is on your screen now, we would greatly appreciate it. And I thank you for giving your time at the end of a busy day, in the middle of a busy week, to join us to talk about this. And I wish you well, and go and be curious about words around you. Thank you so much, everybody.